It's so nice to see all the BreakLine family here. I'm so wonderfully and excited to welcome Ahron Oddman, a friend, the CEO of PSS, in conversation this evening. I want to start out by acknowledging some of the context, though, going on in our country. One of my favorite quotes is by Plato, and it's "Be kind, for everyone you meet is fighting a hard battle." And it reminds me that everybody in our community and communities are hurting today, and we at BreakLine just want to acknowledge and say that we see you and stand with you. Um, and that quote of "Be kind," I mean, it's pretty appropriate welcoming Ahron tonight, because if you know anything or heard podcasts or know about Ahron Oddman, he's a man that leads with kindness and generosity and puts it at the center of his leadership philosophy. So very excited to welcome you, Ahron, and thank you so much for joining us.
Got to turn mute off. I told Zayn earlier today, it's my first time using Zoom. Long time listener, first time user. Thanks for having me, guys. I'm a part of the community. I'm usually on the other side listening to these talks, and I'm quite surprised and humbled by the invitation. But let's do it.
Love it. Thank you, Ahron. All right. So you're the CEO of PSS, who partners with over 2,000 schools around the United States to create meaningful and effective learning experiences. I want to dive in, though, to your experience, because I was just telling you in the talking in the pre call how fascinating your life is, and I know we're going to unpack a little bit of it. But you went to the Naval Academy, spent 9 years active duty as a pilot in the Marines, flew the MV-22. That was near and dear to my heart because I supported the CV-22s on the Air Force side when I was an intelligence officer, so familiar with the platform. Then went to Harvard Business School, as you've put it, when you were trying to figure out what to do with your life when you were growing up. Then you joined Encino, another one of our BreakLine partner companies, and help that company grow from 12 million in revenue to 160 million in revenue. Can you talk to us about your early career path and maybe how that unfolded and some of those decisions?
Yeah, for sure. So I appreciate the introduction. I think my career path to date is a mixture of like dreams and blessings, right? So the Naval Academy thing came out of wanting to be a military pilot. And usually I've been able to singularly focus on one goal, usually pretty whimsical or childish goal, and then just drive towards that. So at 9, I got to spend time with my uncle who's in the Air Force, and he took me to an air show. And I said, boom, that's it. I'm going to fly military aircraft. So just drove towards that. And that through a bunch of, curves as life throws you, got me to Navy, where I was at Navy and said, all right, the pitch for Naval Academy was the Naval Academy produces more pilots than the Air Force Academy does. I said, all right, okay, so I'll do that. That's logical. That was enough to get me. So then I got to the Naval Academy, and toward junior year, they're like, all right, what are you going to do? You get Navy pilot, drive ships, submarines, Marine pilot. Looked at all my friends who are already signing up. So I was like, what do you guys do? What are you signing? We're all going Marines. Come on, man. It's, this was like 2 years after September 11th. I said, all right, all my friends are going Marines. I'm going Marine pilot. They got planes? Yeah, they got planes. Okay. Marine pilot. Go to flight school. It's just a series of, again, blessings kind of taking care of a pretty naive and innocent kid. Got to flight school with the MV-22, like you mentioned. I was part of one of the first classes selected to fly that. And that probably really is what started my entrepreneurial journey. And I think the military is a great training ground for entrepreneurs. And I don't know if anyone would look at a particular aircraft and say, oh, that's what makes you an entrepreneur. But that aircraft, if you remember, 2007, 8, it was not guaranteed that any service was going to buy it. It was very much experimental. It was a project. It was very much like a tough sell, even within the DoD. And so that was my first time kind of implementing technology and getting to sell. And I got to do that for 9 years. So that takes me right up until getting out, where you said, you and I have talked, and like a lot of vets, I applied to grad school to kind of put off that decision of having to grow up and get a job. And HBS was extremely, generous to vets. And it's at HBS that I got exposed to the idea that led me to PSS, which was the idea that, there are over 100,000 profitable, well-running small businesses that are obscure and are not written about in TechCrunch or the New York Times or anywhere really, but they're profitable and they drive, the U.S. economic engine. So I said, I'll go to Encino. I'll learn how to do sales because it does not come naturally to me. And that turned into a whole adventure, but eventually found myself in a space where I could search for and acquire a small business. That's exactly what I did. And a lot of my colleagues, I'm happy to see her on this call. So we took over that company last year, and now we're serving public schools all over the country.
And there's so much to unpack in your response, because I know, listening to other interviews with you, reading the blogs, and hearing you talk about your life, I want to maybe go farther back than that question asked, because I've heard you talk about your leadership philosophy, your some of the best teachers and leaders that you met. You were inspired by your parents and grandparents, right? Could you talk about that influence? Because it seems like every interview I hear of you, you point to that as truly inspirational for your life.
It is, yeah. I'm glad you gave me the opportunity to bring it up. I grew up the son of immigrants, and grandson of immigrants who came here from Jamaica. And I think there's probably a common theme through immigrant stories, whether it's your parents or 2 or 3 generations, however long ago your folks got to this country, but that kind of pulled togetherness, that sense of community. I didn't even realize it was a theme. I just thought we had cool food, we had cool music. But they were kind of baking in these lessons of really what only in the last year or two have I been able to put a term to it, working with other friends actually, like this idea of a generosity culture, where it's one of the main books that gives this idea is the book called The Go-Giver, where the salesman is at the end of his quarter and he's got to close one last big deal to make his number. And, you end up going on this journey with them and just kind of find out one of life paradoxes is that if you really want to get more, you start giving, right? If you want absolute control over something, you surrender to the greater forces around. So that completely came from parents and grandparents, in cousins and aunts, and in ways that I can't reverse, I can't undo. And I'm probably better off for it.
And you also mentioned, and God, I love that quote. And thank you, Kenny, for putting it. If you want to get more, you start giving. And I love paradoxes. I love that they exist in complexity and those nuances. So the message is resonating with me. You said something in your first response, and just so you know, everybody, I'm going way off script because I'm fascinated and super curious. So I'm sorry, Ahron, but you mentioned that flying the MV-22 and just kind of the Marine Corps experience taught you to be an entrepreneur. And you've also mentioned how the channel that was created, and you did by the way, if the blog post you did on Veterans Day, where you kind of point to BreakLine education as well, and mention, hey, BreakLine wasn't there when you were pivoting out of the Marine Corps. And you talk about having a friend go to Encino and kind of talk to you about how, hey, a lot of the skill sets you've learned in the Marine Corps can benefit you as a salesperson. Could you talk about that pivot? Because I know you kind of pointed to the entrepreneurship element, but I would love for you to talk about getting a shot at sales? Because you went directly into Encino's sales leadership.
Yeah, the parallel there is the reason why I say flying them between two is entrepreneurial is because you get to your first squadron, and it's a military, everything's got a manual and it's organized, and there's history. If most other aircraft had been in combat before, and when we got there they said, okay, you guys are going to take the aircraft to Iraq and really prove it out. Is it valuable in the battlefield, et cetera. Like, all right, give me the manual. What's the manual? There's no manual. There's no. Okay. Some blog posts? There's no blog posts. There's no. So it's kind of funny because as a young pilot, as a first lieutenant, you get to your squadron and you know as much about the aircraft as the commanding officer. You're all, we're gonna write it together. And that was a blast. That was formative. Then you mentioned I got to Encino probably about Series B, to the point where we say, okay, we probably have something here. Let's try to start to scale it, not across the whole US, but further than just kind of your nucleus, right? A lot of B2B enterprise software companies, you start selling to your friends, to your network, people you could drive to. You're like, all right, let's go a little further than that. So I take over a territory that's basically the Midwest, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, Indiana. All right, okay. All right, what's the playbook? Let me see the manual. There's no manual. There's no, and by the time I got to a Series B startup, I was hopefully smart enough not to ask, but that's the parallel. That's when you draw back to previous experiences and say, okay, well, let's try this, right? Here's some framework we could use by which to orient, because it's unacceptable to say I have no idea, right? We start to hypothesize and work on stuff. So again, I think it's a blessing. None of this is it's not a really well engineered career path, but I just keep asking people to do stuff and try to solve problems, and things work out.
It cracks me up that you said it, because I know how analytical you are. I've heard you talk about building out probabilities and being very quantitative in your reasoning. But then, and I know this is like, you're a paradox too. You started this by going, it's kind of whimsical, childlike, just kind of directing where I've ended up in my career. I'd love for you to talk about how you ended up taking over at PSS from a Vietnam veteran. After 4.5 years at Encino, you wanted to take on this entrepreneurial journey. And if you could talk a little bit about how you made that decision, but also how you came to decide on the education sector and PSS specifically.
Yeah, so I knew, kind of reaching back to HBS, I was introduced to this concept, and I think a lot of people call it the search fund idea, which is, search fund is kind of the term that encapsulates a lot, but it's basically entrepreneurship through acquisition. Whether you raise money to, search, or you work for a bit and you say, oh, I've got enough of a skill set to go acquire a small company, and I just want to pick that adventure. That adventure just kind of spoke to me. I think they're different sports, right? By the time I left Encino, we were, weeks away from going public. It was a different ball game. There was manuals out there. It felt different, and I wanted to get back to that adventure that I kind of deferred for 4 years. And the company was completely successful. The founding team was like, "Great, go for it. If you find something cool, let us know. We'll write you. We want to help." And so I will completely admit, I did not look into education. People would say, "What are you looking for a company?" Yeah, I look for a company. What sector, what kind of company? And I would say a profitable one, like one hopefully not losing tons of money. Okay, what do you want to do? Like, what industry? No sector. I was, fairly agnostic. There was things, of course, I would not do, that I just, wouldn't be a good fit for. But my key for searching was, and I tell searchers this when they're looking, we all have the same criteria. It's like, 5 million in revenue, hopefully, 20% cash flow. The numbers are very much similar for searchers, but my theory was, okay, I've got a limited skill set, but I think I know what it is, right? Whatever that little circle of competence I have and where I have energy. And so that's a key. So then you're basically just looking for a lock and say, if I add this to X company, boom, possibilities are endless. And so you could find a company that is great. Let's say you're into sales, right? Or into scale, whatever it is. For me, it was sales. So there's no mystery. That was my key. I was like, I know how to scale a sales team. I just did it. And for other people, it might be operational excellence, might be marketing. Again, all things I'm not really good at. But if you get to a company and they're already booming in sales, like you would be, you kind of would take them from 99 to 100, right? If that was your key. But if they were just really struggling with operations and you're like, wow, if we do this, this, and this, you guys aren't seeing, then that company just feels right. And so that's what PSS was. I wasn't looking for a company in the education sector. Now, my dad came to this country on a college scholarship and just drilled us about the value of education. So was that there in the background? Of course. And it's funny how, life kind of comes full circle, but that was my whole search. Like, you've got a small skill set, you've got a key, just go look for the right lock.
I love that. And I want to introduce a quote that I've heard you say that's one of my favorite quotes, but I also want to pause because one of the funniest stories I've heard you tell is about your Harvard professors that would berate everybody about wanting to start a company and introduce the idea of the search fund and that there's all these profitable companies out there. Could you tell that story? Because it's such a good visual for me, and I love it when you tell it.
Yeah. So the two professors, I'll name them, and because they wrote a book, which I think would be helpful if you're interested in this kind of entrepreneurship. There's a professor named Royce Yudkoff, and Rick. I'm forgetting Rick's last name. I'll remember it. Professor Rick, though. These two, just kind of these guys that, Royce went to the business school and then had a very successful career in kind of bigger private equity, Bain Capital type stuff. And then Rick was, it still is, a tenured professor, academic. And they're like they're like the odd couple. Who are the two guys in the Odd Couple? Like Felix and Unger, maybe? I forget. Anybody ever watch Odd Couple reruns? Rick Ruback. There it is. Somebody chatted it. And so they were just these two kind of different, one clean shaven, one scruffy, but both very grumpy old guys. And so we're at HBS. We're, probably one of the main qualities of there is you could raise $1 million easy to do anything. For investors who, their main problem is having too much cash, they kind of figure if you're at this school, you're kind of a reduced risk bet, which is a very bad way to look at it, but that's how they looked at it. So basically we were like, we're here, we somehow got in, let's think of something to raise some money because people are out here giving us money. So we should of course take it, which is why it's a bad idea. It creates adverse selection. But anyway, so we were all thinking, myself included, of what are we going to invent? And then Uber was big. Uber was, they were kind of on their march up and they were recruiting a lot of MBAs. So we're like, everyone was doing the Uber of something, like an Uber of nail job. Seriously, we're going to do your nails at work. That was the thing. Uber of haircuts, Uber of barbers, all these ideas. And so we would tell it to these two professors and they were like, you guys have got to be the dumbest smart kids ever assembled. And we're like, what? They're like, you guys aren't going to make the next space. Like, it's just a low probability bet, So they just so then they go chalkboard, right? Just PhD in economics, is going through the numbers. And we're like, yeah, but enough people have done it that it doesn't seem undoable. They say, guys, that was a number I gave you that day, it stuck in my head, over 100,000 profitable small businesses in the US, very unknown. In the unknown part, the obscure part is the key, because there's 100,000. And actually, 100,000 was a screen that they use. And these are businesses generating over $1 million in free cash flow. So, if you say, well, 500,000, then the number then goes like 300,000 businesses. And oh, by the way, there's like 50 of you knuckleheads chasing them. It's just a supply and demand thing. I said, well, knowing my skill set and how incredibly smart my classmates were, I was like, all right, I'm gonna figure out whatever they're doing, and I'm gonna go in the other direction. I'm not gonna compete with. It's competition is ultimately destructive. So that's what led me, Zayn. I think that's what you're referring to, which led me on the path to say, okay, I'm gonna do this. And right after grad school wasn't a good time for me to do it from a family perspective, but I knew I'd come back to it.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that story. And I'd never heard of the search fund. So I think it's incredibly educational too. Okay, so back to the quote that I've heard you say that I absolutely agree with. Supporting educators in schools is the fastest, highest leverage way to create the world we all wish existed. Could you expand on that? Because I think it gets at the heart of what you're trying to do at PSS.
Yeah, I mean, look, you mentioned it at the top of the call, right? I mean, we're as a society trying to come to grips with a lot, right? How we treat each other, how institutions function and interact with the community. Everybody's got their cause, their own personal thing that really touches them for very personal reasons, whether it's climate, whether it's cancer, or healthcare, right? It could be eliminating food deserts, which exist in cities and rural areas. I mean, just there's like a lot of work to do, right, while you're here. And so we could all kind of talk about, oh, okay, we got to do this, we got to do that, we got to make a more just world, a more peaceful world, but at the base pyramid of all of that, to me, is education, right? All of those systems take people from what is hopefully a more learned society, a more educated society. So look, all those problems are great. We're all going to, pick one of them, hopefully, and work on them and add our talents. But to me, it's hard to see a more higher leverage, higher ROI, immediate way to push, to like move the needle than young people, right? Young people they're the potential energy. They're the unlocked fuel of any country. You want to know how a country is going to do in 30 years? What are they doing with the young people right now? In Central Africa, in India, in East Asia. It's a very, very strong predictor. So for me, just being in this space, it's like, I don't want to leave this space. Like we'll be here. We might be here for decades.
Thank you for expanding. I really appreciate it. When you and I first talked, it was last March. You were just kind of getting started. I was actually in my first couple weeks at BreakLine, and the pandemic broke out. And people weren't going to school anymore in person. And so this is the context. And I love this next question. And by the way, folks, I have a few more questions, but we're 25 minutes in. Feel free to get your questions in the chat for Aaron, and Casey and I will weave them in. You've said that PSS doesn't sell products to teachers. We solve their problems. For example, during the pandemic, PSS has been providing teachers with hand sanitizers, focusing on a critical and urgent need outside of your standard product suite, which was the Learn on Demand system. Can you talk about your approach over this last year and the role that empathy plays in how you think about engaging with your customers?
Yeah, so I was laughing because we closed on the acquisition on March 4th. And I'm looking at my colleagues who are on the call. The governor of North Carolina shut down all schools on March 24th. And you kind of, even before that, you could feel it coming, like a week, 10 days before, like it was foreshadowed that the government would order all of our customers to close. Which isn't just us, right? It wasn't just happening to us. But one, it changed my approach because coming out of Rick and Royce's class, they're like, all right, okay. So then, they said we're the dumbest smart kids, but then like 50 of us took their class. So we were like less dumb to them. Okay, here, you guys are going to get a business. When you go in there, your intent, your natural inclination is going to be to ruin this business because you don't know anything about it. You didn't start it. It was, started probably by someone who's a hard worker and built it organically. So here's what you do. Don't do anything. Don't do anything. Just for 6 months, learn the business. And so I said, I could do that. I could do that. Yeah, I would do that. Well, I could not do that after, all of our customers and, our entire, global economy changed within 3 weeks. I didn't have 24 weeks that they wanted. I literally had, 24 hours of a honeymoon. And so you do things to make the company safe and sustainable, able to work remotely and make sure everyone on your team is okay. But then you like call your customer and say, hey, I know you guys aren't in session. How are you doing? How are things going? It was, I make light of it, but at some point you're just like, look, kids are out of, students are out of school, teachers are upended, literally we're in about 2% of schools around the country. In some of these are large school districts. Think of Raleigh, Durham's like the 15th largest school district. They lost kids. They lost track of where these kids were. They didn't lose kids. The kids are with their parents, but they had to quickly go to online learning, and then they were taking attendance. They were just trying to make it work. There were kids that they hadn't seen for weeks. And then you start to think, okay, well, man, all right, that kid's learning is being impacted. Well, what else do kids get at school? Kids get meals at school. It's actually a second set of eyes at kids in case, they're in distress in the home. So now you start to unpack it. You're like, okay, selling technology is coming way second or third to just call it. And then teachers and principals still to this day, actually, and we'll see the fallout over the next couple of years, they're just stressed out. They're under a ton of pressure. So for us, it more became about this ecosystem we live in and the health of it than just, than just selling printers. And, we had to take a leap of faith and say, like, let's be servants to our marketplace and, knowing that in the end, we'll probably be okay. We'll hopefully be okay. I think it was just that simple. I don't have like a cool buzzword or phrase for it, but that's how it literally played out. It did play out that way. The next 10 or 11 months, our business was in a classical recession, over 25% down for several quarters. Then February, you could feel the tone of the country start to change. Okay, is pretty much consensus that, kids weren't, not that they're immune to the disease, but you do a risk reward and say, okay, we could probably do this safely with them in school. That reduces a lot of other risks between meals, obviously education. Now these kids are, over 2 years, you're about 2 years behind grade level. Let's get kids back in school. Okay. The relief money starts flowing in, so school starts to reopen February and March end up being our business's 2 biggest months sales wise, and I only bring that up just to say we didn't plan for that. We didn't know when that was going to happen, but I think I got to think a little bit of that is a reward for trying to do the right things and not necessarily being greedy and self-interested.
I've heard you. I want to pause on empathy for a second because I've heard you talk about empathy being something that everyone has the capacity for, and it struck me because I'm fascinated by all things leadership and culture and the root word of culture is to cultivate. And when you talk about developing empathy and every individual having the capacity to cultivate empathy, I've often thought about the parallels between kind of the character of an individual is equivalent to the culture of an organization. And it makes me think when you talk about generosity culture, I know that's something that you live and encourage at PSS. I would love to hear you talk about how you've done that and what does that mean at PSS.
Well, it's still in progress, and I'm doing it with really like considerate and deliberate colleagues. I think that's the way to do it. I don't think I have any secrets other than to say, hey, here are these values that seem, fairly hard to argue and push back against. Wouldn't it be great if our workplace was this? Okay, and then from there, wouldn't it be great if when we had interactions with customers, they could feel that? I think it's something largely we did accomplish at Encino, and we're accomplishing at PSS, no doubt about it. We're going to get there, but you start by articulating the goals. I think number two, you start to build the shared language and vocabulary, and that comes from reading certain books, having certain discussions, and I think the third thing is the community. So I'm pulling from Gary Nickel or Chad Gardner or Michelle or Gabby, folks on the call. My wife's on the call. I'm pulling from her, because it's like we do talk about, as much as you want to do all these things, you got to be in touch with your own, insufficiencies, right? And just say, cool, this is it. That's great. I'm going to bring, again, my limited skill set. I'm going to bring my insufficiencies. You bring yours. Let's put them all together, and just act with positive intent.
Love it. Thank you, Aaron. Have a question from Jean-Luc Curry, who is on the call and also going through BreakLine, also a Marine Corps veteran. Says, hi, Aaron. Thanks for joining BreakLine today. Could you talk about how you and PSS see the future of K through 12 education in the United States, specifically across two dimensions? First, technologically, and second, from a policy perspective? And how does PSS plan to adapt to those changes?
That's a hard question. That's a tough one, man.
Yeah, he didn't give you an easy one. Woo! Right
out the gate, could you give me the future of what we spend 7% of our economy on? So some things are going to change, right? Like a lot of industries, the tide has come out, so you get to kind of see what's going on beneath the surface of the water, and then we go from there. So what do I think is going to happen? In my heart of hearts, actually, I don't think a lot of advancement's going to happen. I think I know what I want to happen and what we probably all hope would happen, and something less than that will happen, unfortunately, because of the entrenched forces. Which I don't want to be overly cynical, because an institution that is designed to be institutional, to survive ebbs and flows. So after one global pandemic, you can't say, all right, we're going 100% remote. I do think at the margins, you'll see more technology in schools. That's already been clear. It's not all going to flow out. From talking to educators, here's one thing we do. I'll use the Jeff Bezos method, because over the last 25 years, people ask, well, what's going to be a future of retail? What's going to be a future of this? And he would say, I don't know, but let's think of the things that will not change. Like, here's what will not change. In-person, face-to-face interaction will remain to be the best way to educate young people. Very the end. I talked to, I think our school interacts with 2,400 schools. It's like 60,000 teachers. To a teacher and a principal, I have not heard one of them even begin to make the case for 100% remote learning, right? It maybe they're all behind the curve, but something just tells me from a group of people who do this very hard work day in and day out, that the most effective way to do it is in person. There will be more technology that comes in and will augment. PSS is already looking at digital products that will launch over the next year or two. But some of it will stay analog. And so we're thinking a lot about this digital analog continuum. We think there's something there. So that's kind of what we think will be the same. Like, kids will continue to be in buildings. Curricula will be slow to adjust, but hopefully it'll be faster than it was, right?
I have a follow-on question, Aaron, from my teammate Casey, who she and I philosophize quite a bit. So it's a little bit of a philosophical question, which I appreciate from you, Casey Deeds. She wants to know what trends in education make you optimistic, or gaps that keep you up at night.
The trends that make me optimistic is you saw more parental involvement, because parents had to be teachers, so that was forced, and I think that'll hopefully inspire more parents to be more involved in their child's education, in the school system in general. So that's a good one. A related bullet, but a sub bullet, is something called pods. This idea of educational pods, where education became a bit more kind of small groups and localized, because schools were literally closed, and so parents kind of came together in these collectives and said, again, individually we'll all be more involved, but collectively we can be a bit more cooperative. So that's encouraging. Those are probably the two. Yeah, probably the biggest one. There's other ones like more technology in schools, but that's probably the biggest trend. The biggest gaps. There are a lot of gaps in our educational system. In a lot of ways, folks, I've got a hard time being the alarmist in any group, but that is an institution that is on the edge of failure if you just look at the results. And you could argue about the results. Like, do we look at test scores? Well, we know those are problematic. But in just about every way you could look at the output of an organization, it's not doing well. It's not doing what we would expect. And if it were vastly underfunded, you would say, oh, let's just throw more money. But then if you examined it, you would say, well, we've actually been increasing funding and getting fewer products. That wouldn't fly at like Apple or Google, right? They wouldn't. Just any publicly traded company, you wouldn't expect their costs to keep going up, and then their output to go out. So in a large way, it is a failing institution. It's in a way that we should be involved if you have school-age kids. If you don't have school-age kids, it's the system your kids will inherit, so you should also be involved. One of the bigger gaps I think we're going to see is we're going to see a flight of educators out of the field, particularly younger educators. And it's already an aging, the teacher base in the country is already aging. So, TFA, Teach for America, is one of my favorite organizations. And we probably need like 2 more of those just to fill that in. So that's probably the biggest near gap. One of the biggest design flaws, if you're asking, is the fact that most schools are funded by, does anyone know how schools are funded?
No, but we do have questions around kind of systemic changes and what you'd recommend. So this is, okay. You're weaving right into it.
Okay, so I'll flow right into it, and I'll try to be concise. But the way the main funding for schools is actually at the state and local level, not the federal level, actually. The federal funding kind of just comes in to fill in the gaps created by this pretty poor funding model. The way schools are funded is by local property taxes. So areas that have high property values, which are probably all areas, they're nice areas. I want to live in some of them. I want to live on the beach. They are able to raise more funds per student, than areas that, are less desirable, right? Where the property values are just low. And the reason why that's problematic, in case we all don't agree on it, one of the reasons why I believe that's problematic is because that creates a negative downward economic cycle, which says, it should almost be the opposite, right? Like if we believe education is the passport to the future, right? I will tell you, I do not believe in equal outcomes. I believe in democracy, but I do believe in equal opportunity, in a hyper way, in hyper equal opportunity. So that is systemically the biggest problem with the way we've set up our education system. And we could fix it. It's very fixable.
I agree. I have a question from Angel, talking about the last year and a lot of friends complaining that online school for their elementary and middle school kids does not work. That online framework, they're unable to focus. They think this has set the kids back significantly. Do you think we can help kids make up lost time? And what are some of the means by which schools and their parent-school partnerships, what are they going to need to do to make that happen and make up that gap?
Yeah, so a two-parter. Actually, I think what educators are starting to find is that so a couple bullets I want to organize, a couple thoughts. One is we're actually finding that some students are flourishing in a remote environment. If you think about it, just think back to maybe you're someone on this, someone who would flourish in that environment, or think back to your friends who we all have different personality types and different modus operandi, how we like to operate. And so actually being in an environment with 20 something other young people was distracting. And so we hear, and now it's anecdotal, I haven't seen studies that have come out of it from teaching colleges, but anecdotally you hear stories of kids, and they're probably extroverts, right, who are just rocking and rolling in group settings and in the building, and then they're really struggling at home. And then you hear stories of kids who are struggling in that setting, but at home, they're just rocking it. They have their work, they could log in, they could really focus and lock in. And so one of the things I hope comes out of it is that we start to pay more attention to the individual student, the individual kid. And there's a couple of, I think, we've all probably been personality tested, beyond what we should, but there are insights that come out of it. It is good to know where someone falls on an introvert extrovert scale. It is helpful to know where someone falls on a hands-on versus reading versus auditory versus, kinesthetic learning type of scale. So again, I'm not ultimately optimistic that schools will adopt a lot of that framework, but some will. And that's where I put the responsibility on parents to know their kid. And I'm not saying every parent's got to know how to teach base 10 math or phonics or order of operations and exponents, sine and cosine. That stuff is, we live in the internet age, guys. That's ubiquitous. There's Khan Academy. There's plenty of great instructors who can teach it. But I think the parent's responsibility is to know the individual kid and their proclivities and how they operate. And then lastly, take a holistic view. We have K through 12. That's 13 years to make someone more learned. Nothing says you got to read in first or second grade because the state says it, right? That kid could learn to read much later, right? And I'm using reading as just one of many examples. So the education system we have compared to alternates is actually just really not that strong. It's not from a operational design perspective.
Thank you, Aaron.
And I don't say that to be like negative or create a political platform. It's just like if we were all walking around or like someone had a boogie in their nose, I wouldn't let you go the whole night. You'd be like, oh, you didn't tell me about so I'm just saying as a matter of fact, like out of concern and love and like, okay, we could work on that. Like it's easy. Just, just go to the bathroom, get a napkin.
Yep. Completely agree. The switching gears a little bit, we have an audience full of our Apex community, Maven community, veteran community, and a lot of them, about more than half of them on the call, are making their current transition and making choices about the next step. So Chris Molino, one of those BreakLiners, has a question and pointing to you being an expert at transitioning. You've done it a lot more than just once. Navy, grad school, Encino, PSS. How did you sort through pursuing your passion, purpose, your personal responsibilities for financial security, and the confidence to kind of take that leap and get there?
Yeah. That's a good, I'm going to work on that title, like a expert in transitioning. It's like someone who gets fired a lot. It's like, you're an expert at transitioning to your next opportunity. I know you meant as a compliment. I'll take it as such. I just never heard it phrased that way. Look, I wish I had strong insights, because I think part of it is, no kidding, my personality. And I do believe like your personality in your mindset. I don't think they're determinative by any way, but I feel like you should know it and start to get comfortable with it, because you're going to have it for the next 50 or 60 years, hopefully, and get to live in it. So again, being in my own skin, I know that I don't feel like super attached, to where if my goals say go here and seek this adventure, that I can't, leave it. I'll of course miss people and organizations, but I think more of it's based on my personality type than any kind of insights that I would have. One of the questions was about financial security. The first thing you could do there is just keep your burn rate as low as humanly possible. That makes that phrase right there, burn rate, is directly what leads to this idea of golden handcuffs, which is, when you get to a certain income level, you get comfortable, you grow into it, and then you're kind of stuck. And I was surprised to learn this, as someone who grew up in a family, where people didn't have really high incomes, but there's a world of people with high incomes that feel really stuck in their jobs. I couldn't fathom that, in a heartbeat. So one, I think that's kind of my short, terse answer to the financial one, is to really control your burn rate. On that one, on the transition thing, I don't know if I have many secrets. I think know yourself, be really in tune with what your goals are, and be ruthless with going after them. And so everyone here, the question is you're in a situation, you've oriented to it. It's probably good people, it's fine. I'm here. I want to be here. I can't get here by staying in this place. Then the question then becomes, how long do you wait to make a move and put in preparations? And everyone's got to answer that question for themselves. For me, I'm wired. I'm the guy that's like, I wait 2 minutes. I just reoriented it. I'll give it, because I'm getting older and slightly wiser, I'll sleep on it. I'll do that. I'll give it at night. And then next day, we're working on a plan. We're working on a transition plan. And if that's not you, then that's fine.
Yeah, and experts at transitioning, that's not a negative thing with this community. That's what BreakLine's all about, Aaron. So you're in great company.
Yeah.
All right, and I got to go to this question because it's getting a lot of love in chat. I see you, TJ O'Connor, and I empathize with it too, because when people ask me like who's the greatest leader I know, it's my mom, who is an elementary school teacher for 35 years, still teaching. And TJ O'Connor asks, as a husband to a teacher who pours every ounce of her heart and soul into her students, how can we better support our educators and ensure they have the resources and support systems in place to reach and positively impact every student possible? Another heavy hitting question for you, Aaron.
That's heavy hitting, TJ. You're gonna clearly win Husband of the Year out of this group here. So congrats to you for that, and thank you to your wife for what she does. She has to be, we talk about education. Everyone is in education for the right reasons. Like, I haven't met anyone that's, I'm here for the glory and for the money. It's like, what? They're absolutely there for the right reasons, which, to your earlier question, makes serving them very easy. Look, honestly, the most tactical way that we can help them, I mean, honestly, is to raise funds for them and to put the funds at the school level, not at the district level. So I'm getting really tactical here, but there's sites like Donors Choose is one, which is essentially like a GoFundMe pointed directly at teachers to fund the things that they want to fund, because for reasons I've kind of alluded to, it's a highly inefficient system where dollars don't get to the classroom. It's very wasteful. Fun fact, there's 13,000 school districts in this country. Basically the number of counties, like every county more or less is a school district. So there's 13,000 superintendents. I've met superintendents. We don't need that many. Trust me, there's just layers. So there's a school, then there's a superintendent, then there's the state. There's, it's just, it's unconscionable. So to me, the quickest tactical way to help teachers would be to raise funds or to donate to sites like Donors Choose, raise funds and make sure it gets directly to the principal or lower level. I think that's what we could do. Individually, like as PSS, I hope we grow in influence and impact. And there's things that we have, that we would do. Some of them would be cooperative. Some of them I think would be fairly antagonistic, towards the system. But we got to grow a little bit stronger before we can get too antagonistic.
Love it. We believe in you, Aaron. We are optimistic as well. I can't let you out of the hot seat without asking this question, because I'll tell you, Bethany and I spend a lot of time with BreakLiners talking about how phenomenal a career in tech sales is. That it can be for somebody pivoting that has never been in sales, but the commonality of having a track record of success in everything that they've done, which is the commonality across BreakLiners, the meritocracy, the ability, the problem-solving nature, the being in line with revenue, and the nature of the job. We talk a lot with BreakLiners about the opportunity that exists within the tech industry and specifically sales. You saw that at Encino, and then you built teams and kind of pulled in, did hiring and coaching and selecting for really strong account executive and sales leaders. Could you talk about why you think sales is a great fit, as well as the characteristics that you would search for and select for top salespeople?
Yeah. So first, I'll second the point. I think particularly for the veterans on the call, but I'll blanket state that sales, when you enter any organization, I would ask all of you to highly consider going into sales. Why? Because I think first of all, examine why would you not go into sales? And I think part of that is because there's this misconception of, like oily used car salesmen, which hopefully I didn't offend anyone. Like I buy used cars. They're great. But you get this like hyper transactional picture is really what I should say, right? And I particularly went in sales because I did not want to do sales like my whole career, but I went into it as a training ground. One, most business schools don't teach sales at all. If they do, they do it pretty poorly. That is actually that's actually a disservice, because in a lot of ways, sales provides the blood of, you know, the ecosystem of an organization. That's revenue, money, right? A couple places a business can get money from: a bank, investors, or customers. I would highly suggest that you get money from customers. It's more sustainable, it's lower risk, et cetera, all that stuff, right? So sales, that's what sales does. But in the course of doing sales, you end up having to work on all these others. And I went into it as a stretch assignment, just hoping not to get fired. I'm gonna make quota, not gonna be good at it. I don't like, you know, it's too transactional. It's like, you know, there's no empathy in it. I was wrong about everything I thought about sales. Glad I went into it. So you go into it and you find yourself, most obviously, selling a product or service to the market. That's the least of it. That's a great education if that were all you got. But then what you find yourself realizing you're doing is you then have to, you're matchmaking customer or potential customer prospect with product or service we make. And they don't always fit, right? So hey, this is how we could help you. Let me learn about your business. You become consultative outside the organization, but inside, I did way more selling inside the organization to the product team. Okay, well, to sell the product, I had to start to empathize with them and understand, you know, okay, what's a database? Like, all right, you know, just from ground level and go up. And so in a huge way, I think being able to kind of talk to both parts of a market, inside the organization, outside, is vastly powerful. The analogy I've started to paint together is I've got a slight curiosity in triathlons. I have to do a lot of swimming, swim remediation myself to get into triathlons. But hear me out. So I started to look. My friends that do triathlons, they're, you know, I've asked them, like, okay, running, swim, bike, run. If you look at the people who are most dominant at that field, you would think there's 3 events. So the top players should 1/3 come from running, biking, and swimming. That actually is not the case. Triathlons are usually dominate. If you're an amazing runner and then you can be average in the other 2, you're going to tend to be more dominant triathlete. You could be an Olympic swimmer, and it just doesn't set you apart far enough, right? The race kind of, you know, traveling really can't be won in the swim. It could be lost, but you know, can't be. There's still 2 more events, and that's the same way with business. I know I wanted to be a leader in business, and if you look at where most business leaders and CEOs come from, they tend to come from the sales organization, for better or worse. And I don't think that's because like the sales organization has any monopoly on talent. I think it's because of the things that those folks are put through in their career. You have to kind of do a small internship with product. You got to do a small internship with customer service success, with fulfillment, those sorts of things. So that's the case I would make for going into sales. There's other cases, like it is kind of one of the most purest meritocracies that you'll find in an organization. Like you eat what you kill, as they say, right? So that's the pitch for sales.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ahron, for the last hour. Thank you, Team PSS, for joining. Thank you, Team Oddman, for joining. I know Ahron's wife is joining. Thank you.
He's all with 4 kids under 8. I'm about to call him and tell him to go to bed. It's about 7 o'clock.
Love it. Really appreciate the whole Oddman family joining. Gabby Goodall's at PSS and thriving in one of those sales roles, a BreakLine maven who's there. Thank you all, the entire BreakLine family, for joining Ahron and I for this conversation. I hope everybody has a wonderful, safe evening, and we'll see you next time. Thanks again, Ahron.